Summit meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in December, India and Japan held the first ever ministerial level 2+2 dialogue in New Delhi. Now, this dialogue, which involves the defense and foreign ministers on both sides, is seen as an endorsement of the special strategic partnership between both the countries. So what all transpired at the 2+2 dialogue and how India-Japan bilateral relations have developed over time? We have a panel of guests with us in the studio. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with former Mr. Prabhu Dayal. He is with us, somebody who keeps a close watch on India's relations with several nations, including Japan here as well. We also have with us Akhilesh Suman, Assistant Editor, Rajya Sabha Television, and we'll also be joined by Mr. Alok Bansal, Director of India Foundation. But let me begin with you, Akhilesh, and let's begin with the tangibles as far as this particular 2+2 dialogue is concerned. What is it that both the nations have achieved in the first ever ministerial dialogue in terms of the diplomatic aspect, the strategic and the defense cooperation?
The major issue is security and defense partnership. And if you go through the initial remarks made by Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, in both their statements, initially they are telling security and defense relationship between India and Japan is the cornerstone of peace in Indo-Pacific region and also in the whole Asia. So they are articulating the whole relationship is like that. So you can understand that the talks are going on in that direction. And as you know that India-Japan relationship in defense is still to take off in a big way, because India wants some sophisticated weapons and technology from Japan, but Japan has not yet agreed on everything. That amphibious aircraft is one of the issues that India is aspiring for which 30% manufacturing will be there in India, but Japan could not agree on this still. They have their own laws and acts inside their country.
Okay.
But other than that, the different aspects of development cooperation inside India and outside India. There are two dimensions. One is inside India, that infrastructure development in major parts of the country, including in Northeast, and then development partnership in countries like Sri Lanka, countries like Bangladesh, and even in African countries. So how to implement and how to take this whole move in the takeoff stage, that is a major issue, and I think they are going to discuss the twin issues now, and they are discussing.
Okay, let me bring in Ambassador Dayal here. Ambassador Dayal, and I'm quoting here from the spokesperson of the MEA's Twitter handle about what exactly is the focus here. It says the leaders discussed strengthening of India-Japan bilateral strategic and defense cooperation, enhancing peace and stability across the Indo-Pacific region. Now, the reason why I quoted this is because this is seemingly the key aspect out here, the Indo-Pacific region, and how both India and Japan are looking towards that. Also brings in the China factor here. So how do you look at this?
Well, let me quote what the Prime Minister himself said earlier today, just about 2 hours ago. He said that cooperation between India and Japan is key to peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, both India and Japan have been concerned about China's growing muscular role in the strategic waters, including the Indo-Pacific region. And cooperation between them has emerged as a sort of a natural reaction to this phenomena. Now, traditionally and historically, India had been quite hesitant to take up a position in the conflicts and the competition between the global powers. But all that has had to change, as I said earlier, because of the sort of domineering position which China is trying to assume in our region. Now, I must point out that the Indo-Pacific region has attracted the attention of other powers also. The United States has tried to put in place the Quad, which apart from involving India and Japan, also includes the United States and Australia. India has been a partner there, but has been a little hesitant to escalate things to a higher level in the context of the Quad.
Okay.
Indo-Japanese strategic cooperation has been growing from strength to strength. From the year 2010, there was the 2+2 dialogue, but at the level of the defense secretaries and foreign secretary. And the recent decision last year to have this 2+2 dialogue take place at the level of the defense and foreign ministers was part of the vision statement which Prime Minister Modi and the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had put forward after their 13th summit in October 2018. Now, this envisions closer cooperation and partnership and understanding between the two countries, and both sides want a freer, more stable and more peaceful Indo-Pacific region, and both sides have maintained that peace and stability are essential for prosperity of this region also.
Okay.
So I would view the growing closeness in the strategic understanding between India and Japan to be certainly, as you outlined in the very beginning, in the context of the sort of role which the Chinese have tried to assume. Both India and Japan are opposed to unipolarity. And the Chinese presence, the dominating presence in the Indo-Pacific, in our region, has tended to try to make the world and our region unipolar in their context. And the Japanese-Indo partnership is one way in which this is being challenged.
And both countries look forward to making the Indo-Pacific a multipolar, which is free, open and inclusive. That's what it says. Mr. Alok Bansal has also joined us. Mr. Bansal, on the Indo-Pacific aspect of the India-Japan bilateral relations, and seemingly that has been the key focus area in the 2+2 dialogue as well.
See, as far as India and Japan are concerned, I think this 2+2 dialogue is focusing on maritime dimension and maritime security. And Japan, as you know, is the second country with which we are having this 2+2 dialogue. And one of the advantages which Japan enjoys vis-a-vis India is that there is across the spectrum goodwill for Japan. I think there are no apprehensions, the dialogue which is taking place as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned, I think we'll see greater maritime collaboration. As of now, of course, as far as the defense forces are concerned, all three defense forces as well as Coast Guard have been having bilateral exercises with Japan. We are also having multilateral exercises with Japan and US. We are doing mine countermeasure exercises. So there is a whole lot of defense cooperation as far as India and Japan is concerned. And one big advantage which India and Japan bilateral relationship has is that as far as India is concerned, there may be certain reservations as far as collaboration with US are concerned, there may be certain reservations in collaborating with other countries are concerned. But as far as Japan is concerned, there are no reservations across any political divide, across any regional divide. And as far as Japan is concerned, in almost all the countries east of India, there are reservations and there are problems whenever Japan's military power comes to fore. India is probably the only country with which Japan can flex its military muscles and there will be no ripples. So I think that's where we find that there is a congruence not only of the foreign policy interests but also of the defense interests, because for Japan, if it has to counter the unipolarity in Asia, the only natural ally for Japan in Asia is actually India.
Okay, one aspect, since you brought the defense aspect of the relationship, and you pointed out that the three forces are having that joint exercises for quite some time with Japan. So has the time come now for both India and Japan to move from those joint exercises to defense trade and collaboration in the technological aspect as well? And I'm pointing out here the amphibious aircraft deal, which has been hanging in balance for quite some time now.
Yeah, US-2 deal has been put on the back burner. I think Ministry of Defense has been actually facing an acute fund shortage. One may not talk about it, but all the three services are facing a very acute crunch as far as funds are concerned. And as a result, some of the projects have taken a back seat. But India and Japan are natural allies, and I think as far as defense deals are concerned, as far as Make in India is concerned, there is a huge potential.
Technological collaboration, you say?
Undoubtedly, because Japanese technology, they can be merged with Indian prowess and we could create joint ventures. Like India doing a joint venture with any other country has been fairly successful, because one of the big advantages of these joint ventures are that they are taken out of the bureaucratic control. Anything in India which has to succeed has to be outside the bureaucratic control. So if you do a joint control, BrahMos has been a success. You start doing something with Japanese, that will also be a success. And I think both India and Japan has a huge scope for defense trade. Unfortunately, it has not really attained its rightful position. In fact, there is a huge scope. We have not been able to do so.
Okay.
I think in times to come, we'll see that this increases. And as the economies of scale come into fore, I think both the countries can collaborate and do joint ventures. Because of constitutional reasons, Japan has been constrained as far as this defense trade has been concerned. And I think under Prime Minister Abe, they have been making sincere efforts to come out of that stranglehold and come out and be a significant player as far as defense trade is concerned.
Okay, Mr. Dayal, on the defense aspect, you've already spoken on the strategic diplomatic aspect, but defense also, the collaboration between both the nations is important. And as Mr. Bansal is pointing out, a collaboration on the technology front, perhaps in defense electronics.
Well, Captain Bansal rightly said that Japan is starting to come out of its shell. Now, the fact that it has held bilateral exercises with us last year, both the armed forces and the air force of Japan and India held bilateral exercises. And just a month ago, in fact, earlier this month itself, the Malabar 2019 trilateral exercise, which involved not only India and Japan, but also the United States, that ended earlier in this month, shows that Japan finds it comfortable to have a military relationship with India. Now, the Japanese are quite important manufacturers of armaments. Their weaponry has not formed part of our defense system.
Okay.
But the Japanese have been very cooperative when it comes to Make in India. And Make in India has been an underlying theme of Prime Minister Modi's policies. So I wouldn't be surprised if in due course the Japanese armament industry sets up manufacturing units here in India itself. As Captain Bansal very rightly said, we have a resource crunch, but we do have to meet our defense requirements, our requirements of weaponry. And if the Japanese can be persuaded to set up manufacturing facilities here, I think that may be a very important way forward.
Okay. Akhilesh, on the security aspect and the defense ties aspect, one very important agreement which both the nations would be looking forward to is the acquisition and cross-service agreement. That is the military logistics agreement. So, with the summit meeting between both the prime ministers not too far away, you believe that's something which is sort of a low-hanging fruit which can be achieved?
Actually, just now a joint statement between India and Japan has come. Meeting has been over, and they have mentioned that they are satisfied with the the progress in that acquisition, logistic acquisition. So I think when Prime Minister Narendra Modi is meeting in summit level meeting with Shinzo Abe, I hope that this can be done, because the type of bonhomie that is being shown, if you see the joint statement, the whole effort of joint statement showcase the defense and security relationship between India and Japan. The whole para by para, if you go, they are telling about Asia Pacific, they are even telling about Korean Peninsula, then they are telling about terrorism, then they are telling about FATF. So all these things. So bilateral relationship in their development partnership is, I think, has taken a back seat in this 2+2 meeting, and the whole effort and whole stress in this meeting was security and defense cooperation. And I think this is a messaging. This is a messaging to the world, because they are mentioning South China Sea, they are mentioning the name of Pakistan. So I think this is a very big messaging to the whole world, including China and Pakistan, that India and Japan are going to deepen their relationship and their presence in Indo-Pacific region in a big way in coming months.
Okay, Mr. Bansal, when both these nations name South China Sea, name Pakistan, so in that scenario, and both of them express satisfaction over the fact that the way this AXA agreement, as in the acquisition and cross-service agreement, we're talking about the military logistics. How important would that be? Because India would definitely want to have a more elbow room in Djibouti out there, and so would Japan out here in the Indo-Pacific.
See, I think that's a very, very big achievement, because when we are looking of food and logistics interoperability and food and logistics support to each other, it will be a big thing, because Indian Navy would be able to operate far more comfortably in East Asia and in Pacific Oceans with these bases, Japanese bases there, as well as overseas bases of Japan everywhere, and more Japanese ships will start operating.
Okay.
But let me make it very clear, Japan still has a huge constitutional safeguard which prevents it. As you know, Task Force 150, when Japanese wanted to participate, the constitution did not allow any Japanese ships to participate in that particular thing, and they had to restrict their participation to only tankers which would provide fuel to the ships. So it also depends on how Prime Minister Abe manages to get over the constitutional logjam that he has. He has been trying for a very long period of time. Despite being the longest serving Japanese Prime Minister, he has not been able to surmount these constitutional checks which have been imposed by thing, despite giving a very clear intent that he wants to make Japan a normal nation. He has not been able to. But it is a definite plus for India, because Japanese bases and Japanese ships operating from Indian bases will be a very, very positive development that will show that the two countries trust each other and are on a different or on the same grid, and it will take the relationship to a very, very different level, because you can enter into another ports and take support from them only when you have certain level of trust and confidence in each other.
Okay. Ambassador Dayal, you mentioned the China angle in the initial comments, and how both India and Japan are looking towards ensuring that Asia does not remain a unipolar entity but becomes a multipolar place. But also important here is the RCEP aspect. Now, after India decided not to join it, we have a recent statement coming in from Japan also saying they're also not very keen. So seemingly both nations are in tandem with each other on this aspect here.
I think the Japanese Deputy Minister of Trade, Economy and Industry has enunciated the view that Japan is in no hurry to join the RCEP free trade agreement, and that it wants to bring in India. In other words, it doesn't see much utility of such an agreement without India. And there is every likelihood that the Japanese would take their time as much as possible before entering that agreement. Now, at the same time, it is very significant that the Malabar 2019 was hosted for the first time by Japan. Till now, the Japanese had never hosted this trilateral naval exercise, but they are coming out of their shell, and there are, of course, constitutional issues which they themselves can resolve. But nonetheless, the Chinese muscular presence in the region and the sort of unipolarity which the Chinese are trying to inflict on our region, from the one hand closer to our waters and stretching right across to the in the Pacific zone, is something that the Japanese are worried about as much as we are. And this growing congruence of views is certainly propelling the two countries to take up positions which do see a closer understanding on strategic issues. And once that closer understanding is there, I think cooperation in other areas, including, of course, as I said, someday manufacturing by Japanese companies of defense equipment here in India. I do not rule out that possibility in the future.
Okay. Mr. Bansal, you know, RCEP, maritime policy, or cooperation, you know, strategic cooperation, the defense cooperations, everything which we are talking about between India and Japan. Do you agree that one common element and thread is the China angle?
See, there is no doubt when you talk about preventing unipolarity in Asia, you are looking at China, and that seems quite clear. And so India and Japan coming together, and especially coming up with US, that shows that Quad, which we have been talking of, is to some extent taking shape. And this will create apprehensions in China, because I remember last time we had a multilateral exercise in Bay of Bengal, and I was in China. While Indian TV news channels were not really focusing on it, every Chinese news bulletin would start with the type of ships that were participating in that particular ship from each country, and they would give all the tonnage, weaponry and everything. So this will create a problem. As regards RCEP is concerned, I think we have not said that we have closed the door permanently. We have said that as of now we have not got on board, and there is no doubt that ASEAN and China already have an FTA. So other countries which are joining in would very much want India to get on board, because even Australia has an FTA with China. So the country which have to move in is actually India. And I think other countries other than China and other than ASEAN also are very, very keen that India gets into RCEP. And as long as India does not get into RCEP, I think incentive for countries like Japan also to join RCEP is not there. But if we decide to do it, I am sure Japan would also like, because eventually it is going to be beneficial to all the countries.
Okay, Akhilesh, quick, sharp and final comments on the China factor between India and Japan ties.
You know that if you remember, Taro Kono was the initiator of Quad, and Quad was initiated with the same view that you are expressing, that China is the angle. We want we want multipolar world, and we want multipolar Asia also. That has been very clearly articulated by External Affairs Minister Jaishankar many a time. So I think China is one of the most important thing, because if you see the joint statement, it is full of freedom of navigation. It is full of peace, prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region. So China is certainly the major issue in this meeting.
Okay, Ambassador Dayal, before I close the show, final comments from you on the way forward from here as far as India-Japan ties are concerned. You know, how do you see them going forward, and if challenges, if there are any opportunities as well?
Well, the Indo-Japanese 2+2 dialogue involving the foreign ministers and defense ministers gives a whole new dimension to India's Act East policy, because it brings into focus our concerns, our mutual concerns about China's push for unipolarity, which both countries will resist and will do their utmost to negate, because certainly unipolarity is not acceptable to either of us, and closer cooperation between India and Japan would be the way forward in combating China's growing role in our region, which is not to our advantage.
Okay, so there it is. As our panelists have pointed out, the first ever ministerial level 2+2 dialogue between India and Japan is clearly focusing on the strategic and security aspect of the relations between both nations, and seemingly is going to take them forward to the next level. But let's also wait for the summit meeting between both the prime ministers next month, that is in December, and we will clearly